Hello, I'm Mark McIntire, and welcome to a sneak preview of our new show here on KZSB Santa Barbara, Freedom Matters. And today we have a very special guest. But before I introduce the guest, I just want to briefly tell you what we're going to be doing on this program for the entire session that we're going to be having. We're going to be having guests on who drill down onto the principles and the values that underpin the Constitution of the United States, and especially the Bill of Rights. As we all know, these rights are being challenged by the left, by the right, by the middle, and by foreign powers. And so we think it's important that we drill down past the noise of politics, past the feelings of academia, and past the opinions that we all share, and get down to the principles and the values. And I can't think of a better guest to give us the sneak preview than the one that we have lined up for you today. You know him as Alex Madajian. He is our Vice President for Talent Acquisitions. And Alex belongs to that part of this generation that is up and coming that are defenders of freedom. They are not like the millennials, and they're not even like the iGens. These are individuals who really understand and are looking for the principles and the values of freedom that are enshrined in our Bill of Rights. Alex is a native of Goleta, California. He's a voracious reader. I think he averages about 1.8 books a week. I don't know how you read a 0.8 of a book, but I'll ask him when we get him on here. He also is a critical thinker and writer. Now, I've never had him as a student in class, although he did ask me to be the faculty advisor for a program that he started at Santa Barbara City College, where I used to teach. The name of that project was called the Open Mind Project. It eventually evolved into the Critical Thinking and Writing Project. But were it not for Alex asking me to be the faculty advisor, I'd really have nothing to do now that I no longer teach. So I want to credit him with actually inspiring the show. So, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mr. Alex Madajian. Actually, Alex Michael Madajian.
Well, thank you so much for that incredible interview.
You know, it's great to have a good interview, isn't it? I mean,
I might as well walk away now. That was simply terrific. But
I would like to amend
I would like to amend the introduction a little bit more.
Yeah.
The only reason why Freedom Matters exists is because you were fired, and well, you were
wait.
fired.
They tried to fire me. They tried to fire me. I dragged them through the legal process, and they paid me to leave. Okay.
Right.
That's another show. We're going to do a whole show on that. So.
I apologize for dragging you out into the limelight through my club and all the different affairs, which ultimately got you fired. So.
I would have found my way out to that anyway. Let's take up this issue of you reading 1.8 books per week. Okay. In all my years as a scholar and a reader, ladies and gentlemen, I have never learned how to read 0.8 of a book. Never.
Well,
I mean, how do you do that?
Have you learned how to read averages?
Well, there are some people at the college, by the way, who maintain I don't know how to read at all.
Really?
Yeah. So
really?
Let's start off with the number one question that we're going to be starting off with all of our guests. And by the way, were it not for Alex, we would not have been able to book all 4 shows that are now being scheduled for production, including Michael Shermer, who will be doing our show on February 4th. We also have Kurt Levy, who's going to be on our show on the 13th, I believe. We're also going to have Seth Gruber. He's going to be on our show. Thank you for bringing Troy Warden to our show, actually dragging him over to my house so we could film him while he was in town. We want to say hello to Troy and to his brother Kyle. So let's drill down on, we're going to start every show with this question, so you're a perfect person to ask this question to. And that is, what is your notion of freedom?
Well, what freedom essentially is, whenever a person says, I'm for freedom, well, first of all, that's very generic of you. What are you for the freedom of doing? What's the purpose of freedom? It's a very empty phrase to say, I want to be free. Yeah, everyone wants to be free. Free to do what? And that's something very few people drill down, because I think just about every cause in one way or another supports the idea of freedom, supports the notion of that freedom. So I think what sets people apart on their notions of freedom is what do you want to be free to do?
As opposed to what do you want to be free from?
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
You could say that.
Okay.
That's one way to look at
Okay,
it.
good distinction. Good. Let's begin with
Very
that.
good. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So do you want to
I
start
would
with
say
you want to start with freedom from or freedom to?
freedom too.
Good. You're on.
I
Go for it.
really do believe that the purpose of securing freedom is to pursue truth.
Ah.
Now, a lot of people, I'm a big fan of justice. I'm a big fan of hope and all those other wonderful virtues. But the reason why I pick truth over anything else is because even if we live in an unjust world or an unjust society, if we can embrace truth and we can search for truth, and by the way, one of the premises for this conclusion is based on the fact that I do believe that human beings have a eternal standing, and justice is obviously something that can happen the temporary. You know, somebody slaps me, somebody steals from me. I want justice right this moment. That should be rectified. But I also believe in justice in the eternal sense. And so even if we are in the most unjust society like North Korea, Iran, I believe that there is an eternal justice and an eternal judgment on
Now
everyone.
let me drill back onto that the word eternal. How are you using the word eternal in the sense of transcendence, or in the sense of an actual state of being or a state of mind, or how are you using the word eternal?
Both and.
Both and. Okay, very good.
I'm one of the few people in my generation that continuously is rewriting his eulogy.
You're 21 years old. Stop that.
I know.
Stop that.
It's a dreadful habit of mine, but what I find is that there's essentially two kinds of people: those who are concerned with their life and those who are concerned with their death. I'm a both and sort of a person, but I find that those who are concerned about their death end up living a more full life, so long as they recognize to appreciate their death and their legacy. They have to invest in both the short term and long term. The people who want to enjoy life end up being miserable towards the end of it because they realize that they've only made short term investments. They've not made anything substantial. Now, getting back to your original question on why I pursue freedom for the sake of truth is because I believe in a place like, let's say, the complete extreme society of totalitarian restriction of freedom like Iran and North Korea. The reason why I believe the most unjust thing about them is that they put restrictions on your ability to pursue truth. The reason why I think that is so horrible and so vile is because no matter what situation you are in life, you have no control over that. I'm exceptionally privileged to be born in America, to be an American citizen, but the reason why I consider that to be such a privilege is because I have the freedom to pursue truth. I have access to the internet, and I have access to, I can talk to anyone about anything. Free speech doesn't exist in virtually any other country.
All right, let me stop you right there.
Sure.
So your path along the Freedom Trail, if I can use a Boston expression, your path along the Freedom Trail is the path of finding truth. And in that path, if you're successful, do you believe that you'll find the other three things that all philosophers want to answer? Reality, goodness, and beauty?
I do think that they're all interrelated. And there's very few people that can find truth and reality through the aesthetics, but I do believe that it is possible.
Well, yeah,
very rare, but possible.
There are people like Merleau-Ponty, the French philosopher, who believes that the access path, the footbridge to truth, is actually and wisdom. That the footpath to wisdom is through beauty. And if you were a musician, if you were Johann Sebastian Bach, if you didn't write philosophical tractatus all day long, but you wrote
Right.
sonatas, then you would be looking at truth and reality and goodness through the pathway of aesthetics.
But by and large, most people don't have that kind of brain. They don't. That's just not how
Or
they
time,
think.
even.
And
Yeah.
that's not to put down people. It's
Yeah,
just most people, when they look at art, they don't think, or architecture or whatever. That's not what they're thinking. They're not thinking about morality. But when we see, I believe that the clearest path to truth is seeing an act of love, and the freedom to do acts of love, rather than what another person defines as love. I think that's the best demonstration of what is truth. Because if I could totally disagree with another person, but once I see them doing an act of love, it doesn't matter what their arguments are, or their credentials, or their education, or whatever. When I see a human being do an act of love, I know that it's an act of love, just because I really do believe that it is universal. I don't need to be proven when something is good or bad.
you know it when you see it.
For the most part, yes. That's where the aesthetics comes in, is that there is a certain linkage between beauty and reality and morality and all those things. And I think that the best way of seeing truth is by people's actions. But people need the freedom to pursue those actions.
And by freedom here, now you're talking about opportunity to do things, correct?
Yes, opportunity to do things, but specifically to talk about them. That's just the first step, talking about something and doing them. And you can talk to every person on the planet. You're going to get a different response to how one can be good, what behaviors that entails, or whatever. And although we disagree on nuances, we generally will agree in core principles. Selfless sacrifice, generally speaking. There are different definitions for what that is, but there's that sort of Platonic essence that we all search for.
Hold that thought. Hold that thought on Platonic essences, okay? Hold that thought. Now you're talking my language, okay? I just want to welcome. I want to welcome all of our Facebook. We're on live Facebook right now, and I just want to thank our director Elliot Jacobson and our line producer, Mr. Michael Nicholson, for actually putting this all together, putting us online, so that this is why it's a sneak preview, folks. If you're on Facebook, you're really getting ahead of the curve by watching this show before it's even launched. All right, that's why we're doing this. So continue to like and share and have all those hearts floating up there. That's what's going on. A lot of hearts are floating up there.
Gee whiz, all you old people just can't get off your Facebook and your phone.
It's all about feelings. It's all about feelings. Now, back to
get off your social media and get off your phone. Go experience the real world.
All right, I'll shut the phone up. Okay. We'll get back to the Facebook. Some of you are posting comments, and we'll get to read some of the comments so you can share them too, Alex.
And questions as well.
No, so you mentioned Platonic essences. All right, now a lot of people have never read about Plato and about essences. Can you drill down into that for people like me who just don't know anything about philosophy? According to my department chairman, I don't know anything about philosophy. Nothing.
No basic philosophical
After
concepts.
teaching for
None
50 years,
whatsoever.
I know nothing. So could you help me out here and drill down into Platonic essences, because I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, essentially what a Platonic essence is, it's an idea developed by the philosopher Plato.
Yes.
And essentially he said something, we all have a notion of what something is because there is a Platonic essence of it. For example, you could see 100 different designs of a chair, and they're all different, but we all know what a chair is, or a teacup, or a phone, or a pen, whatever. There's millions of different variations, but they all have the same essence.
Which is an idea of chairness, correct?
Correct.
So
the Platonic essence of a chair is the most cherry chair that ever chaired.
Right. So even a 5-year-old child or even a 3-year-old child soon learns what the essence of chairness is. It's something to sit in. Right?
Correct.
Right.
Exactly.
And they don't confuse chair with a stepladder, or they don't confuse a chair with a table, although they'll probably crawl on the table.
Well, so postmodernists push the push the line on that one.
So
but that's a whole nother
so
discussion.
are these essences, these universal ideas, are they eternal in the sense that you were using the word eternal before?
Well, I believe that, and I was actually discussing this with somebody, that great ideas are not solely monopolized by a great mind.
Right.
I really do believe one of the reasons why we revere Plato and Aristotle so much is simply because they're so old and they were the first people to write so much about it.
Yeah.
I believe that there had somebody as brilliant as, say, Thomas Jefferson lived in their era, then I believe that he would be essentially, we would hail Thomas Jefferson as the Plato of his day, because they both are very brilliant people that are original thinkers and were able to develop these ideas. So, and ideas like the Platonic forms are echoed in many, many philosophies and philosophers after Plato and Aristotle and all these other different folks. So, getting back to your question on how do I believe this applies?
Right.
I believe that every person is pursuing the Platonic essence of truth. And by humans' very nature, we're imperfect.
And this makes
Plato,
them free. And this makes you free. When you pursue truth, you are pursuing the journey of freedom. Is that your position?
Well, freedom, it can depend on your circumstances. I believe that there is sort of an internal freedom and external freedom.
Oh, that's interesting.
And yes.
That's
You
interesting.
see, the external freedom would be whether I live in Iran or whether I live in the United States. United States, I can be open about whatever I want. I can pretty much anything I want.
there are limitations.
As
There are
opposed to the
limitations.
United Kingdom.
But there are limitations.
Well, yes. I mean, you can't scream fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
I mean, yes, those are the basic things. But in terms of ideas, in terms of pursuing truth, I mean, you can say anything from, well, Martin Luther's I Dreamed a Dream speech to espousing Mein Kampf. You can do either of those things.
Right.
And
As opposed to Great Britain, where if you utter what some judge in Great Britain says is hateful, they'll actually can drag you off to jail and put you in a jail. But in America, you can say something hateful, and the worst that can happen to you is that people say, "Oh, he's not nice," and shun you. They'll shun you.
They ostracize you.
They ostracize.
Which, to a certain extent, I honestly do believe is a better system. It's not perfect, but I really do believe it's better than using the rule of law against another person.
So in that sense, we have more freedom than the people in the UK.
We have more external freedom.
External, okay.
Now, internal freedom, that's something that you must develop through Stoicism, which is another philosophy I'll get into perhaps later if there's time. But internal freedom really depends on your mindset. And it's quite arguable that your internal freedom is a bigger factor in what determines your total freedom.
Okay.
On my blog, The Vigilant Bridge Builder, which I do encourage you
to
to follow.
Go ahead and pump your blog. Yes, indeed. Shameless. This whole program is about shameless self-promotion. Yes, indeed. Shameless self-promotion.
One of my more popular blog posts was on who is your master, and the essential idea is that everyone is a slave to something, and to one degree or another. And a lot of people think, well, no, I only own myself. No religion owns me. No ideology. I am a free thinker. Well, in that case, you're a slave to yourself. And I would argue that's actually a far more dangerous and unfreeing thing. If anything, I would say that shackles you to your impulses, your drives. And so once you accept the premise that we're a slave to something, well, we better pick the very best master we could possibly get. And I would say that master would be what is truth, what is goodness, what is beauty, and what is
real
morality. And I would argue that would be Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Now,
but of course, that's a much more substantive argument for another day, much longer discussion.
Well, okay. So I've got a few quotes here that I've assembled just for you because just for you. Now, how do you handle? A lot of people are quite familiar with this quote, And so I think you'll have an easy chance to answer and to recognize who it's come from. War is peace, freedom is slavery, and ignorance is strength. Who said that? Who said that?
Well, I can't remember his real Eric something or other, but his pen name is more commonly known. That would be Orwell.
George Orwell, you're right, and you get a free trip to Disneyland for believing that. Okay, so this is probably one of the .8 books that you have read this week, right? The .8.
Oh dear, he's pulling stuff off of my list.
I know. So everybody's familiar with this. Can you sort of drill down and unlock what is Orwell getting at when he's talking about war is peace, freedom is slavery? You just talked about we're all slaves to something, and ignorance is strength. That seems...
Well, see, the term people throw, I've heard people on both sides of the aisle throw around, it's now 1984. Oh, that's so Orwellian. But very few people understand what really is Orwellian. What is Orwellian is essentially when the government uses both the culture and the rule of law to enforce the power of the state. Specifically, and George Orwell details it through his book 1984 and also Animal Farm by explaining how they took control of the dictionaries, which is a really weird. A lot of people don't really that connection, but he makes the case, and it's totally overlooked now, which is disgusting and shameful.
No, it's coming back. It's coming back. People are now realizing, why am I using the dictionary of my opponents? Why?
Not fast enough. Though.
Yeah,
not fast enough.
What do you mean? What do you mean by not fast enough? What do you mean?
I think that too many people. Well, I do agree with you that people are slowly realizing how important it is but it's mostly right of center. I think I'm concerned that my friends to the left of center don't quite realize how important it is to let in open use of words, to allow any word to be uttered, and to quibble how important it is to talk about the meaning and definitions of words. Do not restrict vocabularies. That's essentially one of the points Orwell makes. Right. Is that actually the main character in the book, I think his name's Winston, talks about how every year they're whittling.
Winston Smith. Yeah.
Every year they whittle down and try and combine words and try and make as few words as possible. Right. So it's harder to communicate ideas. Right. Remember what I was saying about truth? Right. How can we? I can barely understand.
And there were certain words that you could not express in Orwellian speak. In fact, they used the word newspeak. They described the process you just illuminated, that they pared down all of the old words. They got rid of all the old words, and they even invented new ones to call what is called newspeak. But in doing so, there were certain words that you were forbidden to actually speak, which echoes to our own time. There are words that you're not allowed to speak. Now, you won't be thrown in jail, but you might lose your job. In fact, you will lose your job. For instance, the N-word comes to mind. Isn't it curious?
Well, ironically, when it does come to mind, everyone fills in the blank.
Right. As soon as I say the phrase the N-word, everybody immediately plugs in the real word that the word N stands for. So actually, by suppressing the word, you're actually increasing the coinage of the word. You're spreading the word. You're reinforcing the word. You're giving the word power. What could be more powerful than to prevent you from saying a word?
That's what I was saying with some of my left of center friends, is that real oppression is not when one race or one group of people or one whatever uses historic words of oppression. What is real oppression is when you when you restrict another person's vocabulary, when you tell them you cannot do this, such as use a word, and then you let that word control you.
Right. Interesting. The forces that control dictionaries is an interesting thing that's evolving now. And actually, this is one of the good things about postmodernism. As you well know, Alex, I'm not a big fan of postmodern thought. But
postmodern thought is not a big fan of you.
Yes, that's true. But what I do admire about the postmodern perspective is their ability to hijack words, to actually steal words and twist their meaning from what they used to mean to what they want it to mean more euphemistically, which means to make it sound better. You take the word gay, all right? One of my favorite ones, it's in my book, Reason, Argue, Refute, Critical Thinking About Anything, now available on Amazon.com.
Plug.
Well, if you're going to plug your blog, I'm going to plug my book. Anyway, the word gay used to mean happy, carefree, fun-loving. Now, if after this program, you called up your parents and say, "Oh, we had a very gay time interviewing on Professor McIntire's show," they would say, "Oh, I had no idea that you were thinking in those lines of homosexuality." So now, if you look up the word gay, or if you listen to people using the word gay, it only refers to homosexuality. Why did that happen? It happened because a group of people got together, mostly in the media, mostly in journalism, and they decided that the word gay, homosexual was toxic. It offended people somehow. And to relieve the feelings of those people, we had to have another word that made homosexuality sound nice, because we like nice. We have to have nice things. So this is what I'm hearing from you, is the idea that we have to check the dictionaries. And why should we use the dictionaries of people that disagree with us?
Well, we shouldn't. But the problem is, and this is what I was saying earlier, is that people are very slow to realize this, is because we very rarely think about what we say. Mm-hmm. Very, very rarely. True. In my own mind, there are certain words I will not say. And a lot of people don't understand why that is. And the fact of the matter is that it does take an incredible amount of self-discipline. Mm-hmm. Like, for example, not dropping an F-bomb.
Right.
I still haven't done that yet.
Right. Right.
Hopefully not.
I have never heard you use that word, ever. I've known you for 2 years.
I will personally attest, there are so many times where the temptation is so strong.
Yeah.
And granted, it's sort of like not engaging in any, like, if you've never drank alcohol before, or you never did drugs of any kind before, it's really easy to not be tempted if you've never done it before. But after you do it, it's very, very difficult. So things like using the word gay for homosexual, pretty much everyone on the planet has said the word gay, or English speakers to refer to homosexuals. Right. So undoing that is ridiculously hard. Right.
But it could happen. But it could happen if people refuse to use the word gay. If they refuse the word gay, and if they only use the word homosexual. See, another word is racism. Another word is racism. What we're getting at here is the fact that I have the freedom to use words. I also have the freedom to self-censor myself. Mm-hmm. That's another kind of freedom. The freedom of restraint. The freedom of understanding and compassion, and the freedom to control and discipline yourself. The word racism is another one of my favorites. There are no races in human biology, folks, okay? So all you out there screaming about racism, you're talking about something that doesn't even exist, because there are no races. There's bigotry, but there is no such thing as racism. Now, what would the world be like if we didn't use the word racism ever again? That would change the whole complexion of contemporary dialogue about freedom.
Yes, and just as we talked about before, we can restrict our vocabulary. Right. We can try and reinstitute original meaning or truer words to describe what we're talking about. But I would argue a much more fun approach is simply to embrace the absurdity of absurd words that don't have a real modern meaning in today's knowledge of how science works. Right. For example, for those of you who do not know, I'm completely Armenian. All 8 of my great-grandparents came from Armenia.
Actually, you're not white, right? You're actually not white.
No, I'm not white.
You look like a white person, but you're not white.
Well, to all the people who think I'm a white supremacist, no, I'm actually Middle Eastern.
Right. So you're 2% black, you're 2% African.
Yeah, 4%. 4% African.
Right. And 96% Northern Arab is what they usually use.
Well, no. Northern Arab is a term I made up for myself.
I know. I love that.
I also accept the term South Arctic. That's my
Okay.
race, South Arctic. So because race is a social construct, I've just constructed a new race.
Yeah.
I'm also East English.
East English.
So that's my other, yes, and I'm also West Chinese.
West.
So
I see you have open borders. Yeah.
yeah.
You're the first one that you've implemented the open
But,
border policy.
Since race is just a construction of imagination,
You know-
why can't I construct my own race?
Sure, you can. We're actually halfway through the show. We've got 27 minutes and 46 seconds left on the show, according to our control booth. Thank you very much out there. I'm going to give you some reactions to some quotes about freedom. I gave you the Orwell quote, but let me see if you can detect who said what. All right. We'll give you a little test. I told you there would be a quiz.
I studied for that, huh?
No cheating. No, I'm not going to say any of these things. Who said this? I've sold my soul for freedom. It's lonely, but it's sweet. Who do you think said that? Well, first of all, is it male or female?
I'm thinking male.
Female.
I was going
Female.
with Thomas Merton. It
No.
sounded like something he'd say.
No. This was Melissa Etheridge.
Oh, okay.
Melissa Etheridge.
What did she?
Let's
is
go
she
back
known
over.
for?
Well, let's go back over. I've sold
Okay.
my soul for freedom. It's lonely, but it's sweet. There's a message there. What do you think about what she said? What do you think about what she said?
Well, she's referring to what I've previously referenced as internal freedom. As sort of, it doesn't really depend on your circumstances.
Right.
Because I've talked to folks that are Christians in Iran. I've read testimonies of people who have been abused under communist dictatorships like the USSR. And also I've read books by pastors in China who have been horrendously abused for their faith and their belief.
Yes.
But they say this over and over and over again, is that they have freedom in Christ. To them, the freedom that God has given them is more powerful and more freeing than any free anarchist society or whatever.
How does that freedom work? How does that work?
Well, first and foremost, I don't really know how I could explain this to a secular person or secular individual, so my apologies to all secular folks in the audience, but I'll do my best anyway. When you believe that there is a world or a essence of reality that's beyond the physical, beyond governments, beyond people, and not so much a world of ideals, not so much like that, but a sort of, and I don't even want to say a state of being, because that's a little bit easy to hijack with our postmodern intellectualism of today. That's a very easy hijackable idea. Internal freedom is, in one sense, I suppose, stoicism, the ability to recognize that no matter what your circumstances are, you have to be content with it, and you have to make the best of what you have. And if you believe that you have been given salvation, redemption, justice, and righteousness, then that is more freeing to prisoners in some Russian gulag than anything else. Because I will tell you, there are some intellectuals in their ivory towers who are in thicker and heavier chains than there are currently Christians who are right now in some sort of hellhole in China or Iran or Iraq that are being tortured. Right now, those Christians are more free than those American intellectuals.
Well, you don't even have to be a Christian to appreciate this. For instance, you take prisoners of war. Take John McCain, Senator John McCain, who recently passed away, recognized as a war hero because during the Vietnam War, he was in a prison camp and he suffered unspeakable horrors as a prisoner, as well as his fellow prisoners in the gulags, and the only way he was able to survive and keep his faith in the basic principles and the values of freedom in democracy was by this transcendence. And I'm going to use the word, because we're back now to the word transcendence, which you began the whole discussion with Platonic ideas.
Well, as I said earlier, concerning Plato and Thomas Jefferson, who both of them, there's, whether they're a Christian or whether Thomas Jefferson's a Christian is totally a debatable subject, but Plato clearly wasn't. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, they both grasped the idea of this transcendence, of this sort of internal freedom. Mm-hmm. Both of them completely understood what I'm trying to express.
Well, here's a quote from Tom Jefferson. Tommy, we'll call him Tommy.
No, we refer to him as TJ.
TJ, thank you. Here's a quote from TJ. Our greatest happiness does not depend on the condition of life in which chance has placed us, but is always the result of a good conscience, good health, occupation, and freedom in all just pursuits.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
Remember that story, Benjamin Franklin, who was our ambassador to France during the latter stages of the Revolutionary War. He was at a soiree attended by grandes dames, and one of the French grandes dames, speaking in French, because Mr. Franklin actually spoke very, very good French, and she says, sipping her champagne glass, she says, with her little finger, Mr. Franklin, what does it mean to be an American, by the way? And Franklin puts down his glass and he said, Madam, to be an American means to accept the proposition, and the proposition was written by Mr. Jefferson, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I can't think of a better linguistic phrase and turn that describes what you're talking about than that.
Yeah, there is a layer. Well, as I said earlier, Thomas Jefferson was a genius, both philosophically, politically, in virtually every area I can think of worth being a genius in. He had it.
Right, but he's an old dead white guy that had slaves, so therefore we don't read him anymore.
No, unfortunately, we don't read one of the greatest minds of all time.
No, of course not. No. Why would we do that?
Getting back to your, why would we do that? But getting back to your point on specifically what Jefferson was saying on
the transcendence of ideas.
Can you go back to the transcendency? Could you go back to that quote?
Yeah, I would. I know it's a pretty long one, so I'd like to read it again. Our greatest happiness does not depend on the condition of life in which chance has placed us. The configuration of our genitalia, the color of our skin, the country we were born in, the parents that we have, all of the superficial things that people are now fighting over, as though that was going to give them freedom if they got these, to continue. But our happiness is always the result of a good conscience, good health, occupation, and freedom in all just pursuits.
I mean, I would like to explain it more, but I really can't. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I've noticed that about pundits, is that they like to over-explain things, and also intellectuals, they like to go into everything under the sun, when really, you just let him speak for himself.
Let me ask you this question, Alex. We've got about 19 minutes left. Let me ask you this question. In your education in public schools, were you taught the civics? Were you taught the value of transcendent ideas that I just read?
No, I believe that teachers they very rarely will start at the root. Unless you're dealing in philosophy, very few teachers bother drilling down, because, they accept the notion you should do something that's nice, you should be loving, you should be kind. They don't drill down into what the definitions of kindness are, what the definitions of love are. And that's fine, because not every class should be philosophy. At some point, you do have to be a bit more specific.
Right.
But this is something that very few teachers realize, is that a lot of these values, I mean, there are core elements and core aspects and obvious signs of what is goodness and whatnot, such as you can't bayonet babies, just don't do that.
Right.
But there are still many not even many aspects, but essential elements of values that are individual. And I'm not trying to say relativistic, oh, it's whatever you want it to be, but it is up to you to discover them. Mm-hmm. Getting back to my original point, mm-hmm. why I believe the importance of freedom is to pursue truth is because only the individual can pursue truth. Mm-hmm. You can't do it for me. Mm-hmm. I can't pursue truth for you. Mm-hmm. At best, I can teach you and I can share with you my ideas. That's the best I can do. Mm-hmm. Is I can share ideas, I can mentor you, you can mentor me, we can teach each other. But when it comes to you making a decision on what you honestly believe is truth, mm-hmm. only after honest searching on your part, mm-hmm. and an honest decision on your part, mm-hmm. can you really say you put your foot down in the sand, and then can you say, I'm going to stand on my principles?
All right. Now here's the $64 question. What's the relationship between knowing truth and conscience?
Between knowing truth and conscience. Yeah. How would you define conscience for this question?
I was just waiting for somebody to ask me that question.
Could you give me, let's up it to $75.
Yes.
I'm an Armenian, so I'm going to haggle with you on price.
No, you're going to get a $25 response.
That's it? Okay.
Conscience is the awareness of being aware of something.
So, like sentience?
No, sentient. A dog is sentient. But when's the last time you knew a dog that sat on a curb and said, you know what, when I get home I'm going to listen to that CD by some rap song, or
good job.
Yeah, or when animals have sentience. I'm not talking about that. Conscience is awareness of being aware that you have sensations about reality, truth, goodness, or beauty. Now, in the case we're talking about ethics, what does ethical conscience really entail? Ethical conscience entails the idea that I've done something wrong. I can't lie to you, Alex, until I lie to myself. That act of lying to myself is immediately aware to me. Immediately. That's the type of conscience that I think you were trying to describe in terms of your internal freedom.
Yeah, that is a very good way of essentially describing it. I would agree with that. Is that the? Did you answer your own question, or were you going to?
Well, no. I was asking you, what's the relationship between these transcendent realities that you believe in, both as a Christian and as a philosopher, both theologically and philosophically, because I know you read in both of those areas quite extensively. So what is the connection between transcendence on the one hand, the world of the Platonic essences, or the world of heaven and grace, in the mercy and justice and kindness, in the theological sense? What's the relationship of those things to the exercise of individual freedom?
Well, the bridge between that is essentially your pursuit of those things. And as I was saying earlier, concerning internal freedom, is the difference between external and internal freedom is external freedom is determined by our government and how that's set up.
Right.
And it's great to be externally free. That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. But it's more important that we are internally free. Mm-hmm. And we only can achieve internal freedom by pursuing what it means to be living in those values. Mm-hmm. And we do that best by our individual natures, by ourselves. We, mm-hmm. by all means, need the help of other people. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's wonderful to have the assistance of people like Plato and Thomas Jefferson and all the other thinkers that we referenced, and the many others throughout history. But they're essentially guides and street signs, giving us their best guess.
Mm-hmm.
We at some point have to drive our bus. And if you're talking to me, I have the belief that it's not so much we choose where the bus goes, but rather we choose who's driving the bus.
Right. Right. Now, in your case, however, we've had this discussion before many, many times. In your case, God is driving your bus, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
In transcendent affairs, but God is not necessarily driving your bus in practical or material affairs. Have I got that right, or am I wrong on that?
Not quite actually. I would say that a person's values will determine their behaviors.
Okay.
If they're an honest person.
Right.
Now, some people will maybe not have drilled down and just don't know what their values are. They like niceness and they like kindness, so they just do what everyone else seems to be doing that's nice and kind. They just do what it's sort of, they're basically letting society drive their bus.
Right.
Which
Right.
when you let 20 people drive anything, it's a disaster. Just as a general rule of thumb, 20 people driving a bus, or in our case, all of society driving your bus, it's gonna crash.
I told you about the experience of the Brazilian aircraft carrier, right, back in 1966. By the way, folks, Alex is a dual citizen. He's also a citizen of Brazil, so that's why I torment him with this Brazilian aircraft carrier. Back in 1966, the United States government was selling off all their surplus boats and ships in the Navy, and so the Brazilian government, they bought a aircraft carrier. But being a Brazilian government and doing things the way that they do down in Brazil, which you should know about, Alex, they decided to have two captains. One captain to steer the boat into the wind so that the captain of the airplanes, could launch the planes. But what happened, unfortunately, on the maiden shakedown voyage of this aircraft carrier is that the two captains got into a fist fight on the bridge. I mean, actually, duking it out, right? It's a poop, 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 poop. And so the aircraft carrier ran aground very close to Rio de Janeiro, and the beaches in Ipanema. People were watching this whole thing take place. So, two captains of an aircraft carrier doesn't really work. Somebody has to be in charge, right?
Exactly.
So is that what you mean by the external freedoms are controlled by the captains of the aircraft carrier?
Right. And don't get me wrong, the amount of people may not always be a factor. You could have just one person driving the bus,
right,
but it could be an awful person. There are some people in America today and all across the world that let the ideologies of Marx and Hitler drive their bus. And it's awful. They are miserable people. It does not work for them. They are not free internally.
Unfortunately, many of those people have never read Karl Marx. They've got it from some professor of political science has told them what Karl Marx has said. Why aren't people? Well, this doesn't apply to you, but why has there been a decline in the literacy, the reading rate of younger people? When I first started teaching 51 years ago. At Westfield State University in Massachusetts. Every student I had in class, and I had about 25 average students, every one of them was quite comfortable in reading original sources, all right? If we were studying the Constitution, we would read John Locke, or we would read Rousseau or Thomas Hobbes, and they could handle it. They could read Locke. But you give a student in college these days a section on John Locke's treatise on government, and they're flummoxed. They don't know how to read it. I mean, what happened? What happened?
Well,
what happened?
One little correction I'd like to make is that millennials are not in fear of reading.
I'm not.
They actually read quite a lot of literature, but it's all modern books. It's things like The Fault of Our Stars, Hunger Games, Harry Potter, and things like that. They're really into fiction. And there's nothing wrong with fiction. I love fiction. Some of my favorite books are fictional.
Right.
But what they're opposed to is reading something on ideas. And don't get, now, not all ideas necessarily. They like self-help books, uh, but they're not going to be reading older books. They're not going to be reading philosophical treatises. They're not going to be reading books like that, books that are idea-centered. They're going to be, they're into reading as an entertainment source.
So about feelings. They're reading books about feelings.
Yeah, essentially that's a way to put it up, to describe it, is they like books that are not necessarily substantive. And there's nothing wrong with reading for entertainment, by no means.
Right.
But it slowly degrades what it means to read with a purpose. The books I read, I try to read a book with a distinct purpose. Sometimes it's a gift, and if it's from a person I respect and admire and appreciate, they usually are dead on. And I enjoy reading their book because they conveyed a message from their own mind and their own heart. And I appreciate that. I appreciate reading works like the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. I just finished reading Poor Richard's Almanac. It was a beautiful detailing of what was going on in that brilliant mind of one of the founding fathers. And I regularly read the Bible. It is an incredible book. I've read it over many times, and the fact of the matter is that you can read it for a superficial, feel-good emotional experience, but it was clearly meant for deeper truths. And that's true with any book that is truly great. I'm not saying that great authors and great books don't exist nowadays, by no means. I'm not saying that at all. But my generation enjoys superficiality because they had never really been trained, mentored, or inspired to drill down. They're not so much afraid to talk about religion or politics. It's just they don't know how, because their parents have not taught them, and their grandparents have not taught them. Everyone has stayed away from religion and politics, which is nice, I guess, on Thanksgiving. But when it comes to voting, when it comes time to vote, when it comes time to deciding what do I want to do with my life, that is the most important time to talk about religion and politics.
I must point out to our audience that Alex has never been one of my students. I was a faculty advisor to a club of his, but he didn't need to be. And I say he didn't need to be one of my students because I was teaching critical thinking and writing, and what I taught there was learning how to learn on your own without a teacher. My pedagogy was, and continues to be, that a professor or a teacher is a person who puts themselves out of business as quickly as possible instead of prolonging the relationship and continuing the relationship. Alex, because he reads so much, I'm not going to go near the 1.8 thing again, but because he reads so much, he has actually learned how to learn on his own. And when I was teaching the critical thinking class and introduced this concept, young people gravitated to it. They thought it was great. They thought it was wonderful that they had the freedom to think against the prevailing paradigm of their culture or of their time. They enjoyed having the chance to select their own term paper topic. I never assigned a topic, contrary to what some people believe. I never did. They would write a term paper, and then they were required to refute their own term paper. They found that exhilarating, because up until that time, they had only been taught to accept and give back to the professor or the teacher whatever perceptions and assumptions and prejudices and biases that the professor was putting out there, so they could get the A and move on and get out of there. Get the degree, get the job, marry the wife, have the kids, buy the house, die, get thrown into a hole, and that's the end of their existence.
Pretty much. That's, unfortunately, though, that's been the paradigm of my millennial counterparts. I would say, though, that the millennial generation is the last generation that can be like that. It was fairly true for the Gen X generation and the baby boomers, but that is slowly becoming more and more of an impossibility to have that sort of a mindset, because it's just becoming life is becoming tedious. The depression rate and the suicide rate are climbing, and it's despairing because poverty has been dramatically reduced. Sicknesses and diseases have been dramatically reduced. This is the most prosperous time to be alive, materialistically speaking. Yet, why is depression and suicide on the rise? Yeah. Even though, if that's really what it's all about, is materialism. It's because people are slow. My generation is probably the last one to miss this. Hopefully that this can be recaptured before too much time elapses. But we're slowly realizing that there needs to be more to life than materialism.
Right. That's why I'm not bagging on the millennials at all. In fact, I feel sorry for the millennials. I think that my generation has done the millennials a great disservice, because the generation that killed God and killed transcendence and killed logic and killed reason through postmodernism, we're the ones that did the millennials a big disfavor. We taught them that the only things in life are to be materialistically successful. And
I think that the problem that your generation forgot, and by no means am I ragging on you, and not even the majority of your generation, but at least the intellectual elites of your generation, is that they figured people would always have the same values, the same sort of Judeo-Christian values. They were just trimming the excess fat, like God. That's all God was to these people, is excess fat that was prohibiting people. Yeah. They didn't quite realize, no, that's the reason for your values in the first place.
You've landed on something very important here. Something that I've missed, and that is that one of the reasons why my generation put so much emphasis on material success and material happiness was because they merely assumed that parents were doing their principles and values at home. They were getting their ethics and their sociology and their psychology from home. But as it turns out, 51% of people who are married heterosexually are now divorced.
Yeah, not to mention that
we've got
most people go to public school.
We've got 55 seconds left on the show. I want to get your quick reaction to one of your favorite writers, Soren Kierkegaard. He says that people demand freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought, which they seldom use. I'll read it again. People demand the freedom of speech as a compensation for the freedom of thought, which they seldom use.
You can't refute or expand upon what's right.
I want to thank you for being on our show. I'm hearing our closing music. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for joining us on Facebook. And we wish you the best of success. Actually, we don't have to wish you. You're already successful. You're already successful, Alex. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time with Dr. Michael Shermer. Bye-bye.